In this video, we are going to discuss Seamus Heaney's poem Death of a Naturalist. The poem is taken from Seamus Heaney's collection of poems, which is also called Death of a Naturalist. This was the first collection of poems or volume of poetry published by Seamus Heaney. Before getting into the poem, I would like to give you a very brief introduction to the poet. Seamus Heaney belongs to the modern times, that means he belongs to the 20th century. He is a poet from Ireland and he instantly became very popular because of his unique kind of presentation. He was also a poet of nature, but the way he presented natural objects, the way he viewed things of nature was very unique and very different. And that is why Seamus Heaney is a great modern poem, modern poet. All the features of modern poetry can be found in his poetry, and that makes him a great poet. Now, this particular work, as I said, Death of a Naturalist, belongs to his debut work of the same name, Death of a Naturalist, and after this he kept on publishing a number of volumes. About 20 volumes of poems and criticisms have been published by Heaney. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature for his great contribution towards English literature. Now, with this basic introduction, I would go into the poem. The title of the poem, Death of a Naturalist, is very significant, but I shall discuss the significance of the title after completing my whole poem. Because without understanding the poem, it would be difficult to understand why the poet had given such a peculiar title. Just one small information. Who is a naturalist? What is a naturalist? The significance of the term naturalist has to be understood. So basically, a person who studies nature can be called a naturalist. So it's not a person like William Wordsworth or any other great poet who loves nature and writes poetry about nature. They would be called romantics. But a person who is an expert of natural history, or who is a student of natural history, who studies nature, so that kind of person will be called a naturalist. Now, what is the significance of the term naturalist and why the poet calls this particular poem as Death of a Naturalist? We will read and find out. So let's start with the first stanza. There are only 2 stanzas in the poem, but as it is the typical feature of modern poetry, the way of presentation, a simple thing which has been presented in the poem has been presented in a very complicated way. The basic concept, the basic idea is that modern lifestyle, especially after the 2 world wars, became very difficult and very complicated. In order to represent that complicacy in our lives, in order to represent the difficult situation that we human beings are in the modern times, the poets of the modern period have started writing in a very difficult language. So there are images in the poem, there are ideas in the poem which are very difficult, but if we try to logically think, they may appear a little complex, but they are almost like a puzzle. If we are able to arrange the thoughts and ideas in a proper sequence, we will definitely understand what the poet is trying to say and what is the meaning of the poem. So the meaning might be a little difficult to understand, but it's not impossible. Let's start reading the poem. All year the flax dam festered in the heart of the townland. So first concept that you need to understand is what is flax and what is flax dam. Flax is basically a plant which you can see right now in your screen. You might have heard that flax seeds are very healthy and many people consume them. They put the seeds in water and after soaking them for some time, the flax seeds are eaten by people, consumed by people, because they are a very good source of omega-3. So for the purpose of getting flax seeds also, and from the same flax plant, we get a very valuable kind of fabric which is called linen. I'm sure you have heard the name of linen, which is a very expensive fabric, a very fine quality cloth material. It's different from cotton, it's different from silk. So this linen is obtained from the flax plant. So flax plant are cultivated at different places. You can see the flax plant here having purple colored flowers. They are cultivated in order to get the flax seeds and more importantly to get the raw material for making linen. And the next concept that we need to understand is what is a flax dam. So the image that is now visible in front of your screen is that of a flax dam. Basically, a flax dam is not like a normal dam which you see around in the country or in the towns where we have a lot of water reservoirs which are called dam. Flax dams are basically a small area in which the flax plants are put for rotting. Flax and jute have a similar tendency. After harvesting the plant, it has to be thrown into stagnant water so that the outer covering of the stem starts rotting. As soon as the outer covering starts rotting, the fiber which is present inside is exposed and that fiber is obtained from which linen is woven. So it's very much similar to the processing of jute that is done all around Bengal. So farmers keep this muddy, soggy areas in the village in which they put the flax plants and allow it to rot in the heat of the sun. After a few days, as the plant starts rotting, the farmers take them out and obtain the products. Now, this rotting process is a very smelly process. It looks very ugly and smells very, very bad. So obviously for a common person, it's not a very attractive place. But for our poet or the poetic persona in this poem, in his childhood, it was a matter of great interest to go by the flax dams and see small tadpoles and frogs living there. So that is childhood all about. In childhood, the most silly thing also appears to be interesting. Children can play for hours with just a lump of clay, which is nothing but nonsense or very ordinary, very common for us adults. But for a child, it can be a matter of great entertainment. So they do not differentiate between a very costly play item and a very ordinary thing that is obtained from nature. And that is why our poet, when he was in his childhood, when he was innocent, he used to visit the flax dams and enjoy the activity of the tadpoles and the frogs. He often collected the tadpoles and brought them to his house. So that is why the poet is making a reference to the flax dam. So coming to the text once again. All year the flax dam festered in the heat. So throughout the year, the flax plants in the bog of water kept on rotting in the heat of the sun. Festered means rotting. Normally the term festered is used for wounds. Like if you do not treat your wound, if you are injured and if you do not treat your wound immediately, if you do not put some antiseptic, the wound would start rotting. So in that sense, the word festered is used. But here, there is no wound at all. What is rotting is the stem of the flax plant. So throughout the year in the dam, the flax plants start rotting. They keep on rotting. And where is this dam located? It is located in the heart of the townland. That means right in the center of the town there is a bog, and in the bog people throw the flax plants and wait for them to rot in the heat of the sun. Now the poet starts describing the appearance of this flax dam, the appearance of the bog. In Hindi, we will call them kichad or daldal, in which they throw these flax plants. Green and heavy-headed flax had rotted there. So the flax plants when they are thrown into the bog, they are fresh, they are green in color, and they are heavy headed. That means they are quite heavy at the top. The top portion of the bog appears quite loaded, heavy with the flax plants, and they keep on rotting continuously, weighed down by huge sods. Now what are sods? Sods are tufts of grasses. Again I am showing a picture in which you can see the tufts of grasses. People cut the chunks of grasses from the soil. Farmers do this mainly. They cut the chunks of grasses from the soil and put it in the water, put it in the bog, so that it helps in the process of rotting. It is something like a catalyst. It helps in the process of rotting the flax plant, and that is why the top portion of the bog or the flax dam is looking heavy by the weight of the sods or the tufts of grasses. Daily it sweltered in the punishing sun. So sweltered means heated. Like when you are walking around in the summer sun, you start sweltering, you are sweating, your body gets heated up. Similarly, the flax plant also gets heated by the heat of the sun. The sun is called punishing. This is obviously personification, because sun is not a human being. The sun cannot punish someone. But in summer season and in spring season, generally the heat of the sun in the western countries is quite high compared to the winter or autumn season, and in that warmth of the sun, in that heat of the sun, the flax plants gradually start ripening. So sweltered here means getting heated up, and punishing sun is an example of personification. That is the sun which is giving the heat to the plants. It's scorching, it's burning the outer surface by the heat. Bubbles gargled delicately. As the gradually the flax plants, they start decomposing, bubbles appear on the surface of the flax dam, and the bubbles make a sound which is similar to the sound that is produced when we gargle. Like we take water, especially when our throat is sore, we take hot water and start gargling. So you must have heard the sound of gargling. Similar kind of sound, boiling or gargling type of sound, is audible. Not very much, but delicately, very gently it is audible when bubbles appear on the surface of the flax dam. Scientifically speaking, this happens because of bacterial decomposition. You can understand that there is a lot of bacteria present that is in that dam, and the bacteria is gradually eating up or decomposing the whole thing. So because of the bacterial decomposition, the bubbling happens and the gargling sound is coming out. So this gargled delicately is a very important expression. You need to understand here that gargled is an example of onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia means whenever a sound is represented in the form of a word, that is called onomatopoeia. So gargled is also a sound which generally when you put water in your throat and you start making that peculiar sound, you circulate the water inside your throat, the sound that comes out is called gargle. So the sound of gargling is represented through the word gargled, and that is why this is called onomatopoeia. So bubbles gargled delicately, that means bubbles appeared on the surface of the flax dam and it started making a gentle, soft gargling sound. Blue bottles wove a strong gauze of sound around the smell. Blue bottles are like flies, small insects, almost like the mosquitoes or flies. They keep on hovering because there is so much of dirt and so much of bacteria present everywhere. So this is a favorite place for insects and flies. So blue bottles, which are flies, they keep on hovering around the dirty bog, around the dirty flax dam, and by the wings they produce a sound around the smell. What kind of sound? The poet is using a very complicated image here. A sound imagery has been produced, which is called wove a strong gauze of sound. So first you understand what is a gauze. I am sure you have all seen what a bandage is. It is a white colored cloth, but the weaving of the cloth is not as done like in normal cloths. The weaving is a very loose kind of weaving. The gap between the threads is clearly visible. So when you get injured, the doctor generally puts a cotton ball on the wound and then wraps it with a gauze or a bandage. So gauze is nothing but a white colored bandage. So according to the poet, the blue bottles wrap the whole atmosphere around the flex dam, around the bog, with a sound which is similar to the sound of the gauze. Now, how can gauze have a sound? You need to understand that here things are becoming a little complicated. As I said, the expressions in modern poetry are difficult to understand. We need to think a lot because these images are taken from science or from our medical science. That is why it appears a little bit weird. Just like a bandage is used to wrap the wound, similarly, the sound of the blue bottles, which are a kind of fly, are used to wrap or surround the whole atmosphere. The atmosphere around the flax dam is surrounded, wrapped up by a sound. And what kind of sound? It is the sound of the blue bottles flying with their wings. So that continuous fluttering sound is compared to a bandage which has covered the whole place. Just like a bandage covers the wound, similarly the sound of the blue bottles is covering the whole atmosphere. So already the place is full of foul smell, and also beside the foul smell there is a foul sound coming from the place. The sound is created, the boring monotonous sound is created by the blue bottle flies which are continuously hovering around this place. So this is a sound imagery which is created here, and the expression wove a strong gauze of sound, this is both a sound imagery as well as a metaphor, because the sound is compared to a bandage, and that is why it is a metaphor as well. Coming to the next line, there were dragonflies, spotted butterflies. Naturally, the place I said, it is a damp place with full of mosquitoes and flies. Because of rotting, all these insects find this place very interesting. So there are dragonflies present in this place, and there are butterflies also present in this place. Spotted butterflies means butterflies having spots or dots in their body. But best of all was the warm, thick slobber of frog spawn that grew like clotted water in the shade of the banks. But the most interesting thing out of these was the frog spawn. So first you understand what is frog spawn, and then you will get into the line. As you can see on the screen, this is the frog spawn. When the female frog gives birth to the younger ones, first they do not actually lay eggs. The eggs look somewhat like this. It looks like a jelly with a black dot in it. This jelly is generally left in the corners of the ponds or in the corners of the flax dams, and in the heat of the sun, gradually this jelly transforms into the tadpole, and then gradually the tadpole turns into the frog. So this is another image, as you can see, in the corner of the bogs, in the corner of the ponds, in the corner of the flax dams. Generally the mother frog lays her eggs, which almost look like jelly, and that jelly like substance later transforms into the tadpole. So according to our poet, you need to understand that right now the poet is a young boy. According to the young boy, this is the most interesting thing in the flax dam. He is most fascinated by this jelly like substance in the flax dam. So let's see how he is describing this substance. He says, but best of all was the warm thick slobber. Slobber means a saliva type liquid, a liquid which is transparent and thick. Generally when the dogs stand idle, you will see that a saliva keeps on falling from the mouth of the dog. That is called slobber. So a thick transparent liquid. And you can understand that the jelly like eggs laid by the mother frog is also same thing, a transparent and soft liquid substance, and the technical term for it is frog spawn, that grew like clotted water. Clotted water means water which is jammed. If you keep water for a very long time, you will see gradually the water starts becoming filled with dirt and filled with mud. It's no longer that pure transparent in color. It starts becoming muddy, it starts becoming dirty. So clotted water or jammed water is also another comparison which is used to describe the appearance of the frog spawn. So this is a simile, that grew like clotted water. So like clotted water is a simile. And where do you find this? In the shade of the banks. So not in the middle of the flax dam, but in the corners, in the banks of the dam, you find the eggs lying and waiting for maturity. Here, every spring, I would fill jam potfuls of the jellied specks to range on the window sills at home or shelves at school. So now the poet says that every spring season, spring is the season of rebirth of nature. Up to winter season, everything is cold, everything is dead, and as soon as the spring season appears, there is a fresh new activity in nature. So this is the time when most of the animals and birds reproduce, and the frogs also reproduce during the spring. So every spring season, our poet, young poet, would go to the flax dam and collect such jelly-like substance which is called frog spawn in the bottles of jams. So normally the jam bottles are used for keeping jams and jellies, but instead of doing that, this little boy uses those glass jars or glass bottles to store the jelly-like frog spawn. Of the jellied specks, once again I am showing you the image, you will understand. You see, the frog spawn is looking very much like jelly, thick like jelly, and specks because there are small black dots. Specks means dots. So the jellied specks, that is the frog spawn, is stored by this little boy in his small jam jars. Why? Because he will keep it on the side of the window at his house or on the shelves at the school. He will either keep it in his house or take it to his school. Now what is significant here is he has to keep it in the windowsill because it should get ample of sunlight. The jelly-like substance will ultimately mature into the tadpole only if it gets proper sunlight, and that is why he has to keep it in the windowsill or on the shelves at the school, and wait and watch until the flattening dots burst. and gradually he will have to wait for some time, and slowly he will see that those black dots are bursting into life and they are becoming little tadpoles. Burst into nimble swimming tadpoles. Nimble means very quick, very small, very lightweight, very quick tadpoles. If you have seen tadpoles, you will see that they are very quick in motion. They quickly move from one corner to another. So these black dots within the jelly ultimately mature and become the tadpoles. So basically this boy's interest on the tadpoles is very similar to our interest in the gram seed or chana. In our junior classes, when we were taught for the first time the process of germination, most of us performed this experiment at home. We soaked the gram seed, we kept it wrapped in wet cloth and saw how that dry gram seed changed into a small plant. It started germinating. It started having small shoots. Gradually, if you gave proper watering and proper sunlight, the shoot gradually changed into a stem with leaves. So that is a very fascinating thing, how an almost dead thing changes into a living thing. Same way, this boy had great interest in seeing how the frog spun, which looked nothing like a living creature. It looked like a jelly-like substance. Suddenly burst into new life. It changed into tadpoles. That is why every spring he collected it in jam pots and kept it in his house or kept it in the school. Why in the school? We will come to know in the next line. Miss Walls would tell us how the daddy frog was called a bullfrog, and how he croaked, and how the mammy frog laid hundreds of little eggs, and this was frog spawn. So the school teacher, Miss Walls, most probably the science teacher, had taught lessons on the basics of zoology, the basics of reproduction. She told the little children that the male frog, the daddy frog, you can see the language that is used by the teacher. These are language that is used only for the primary level little children. So not the male frog, but the teacher uses the word daddy frog. The daddy frog, which is technically called the bullfrog, croaked. Croaked means to make a low, loud noise. The noise that is produced by the frog is called croaking. So this is also onomatopoeia. The sound that is produced by the frogs is called croaking. So this is also an example of onomatopoeia. And another information that the teacher said was the mammy frog, the mother frog, the female frog, laid hundreds of eggs together. So unlike in many other organisms, frogs give birth to hundreds of eggs at a time. And this egg was the jelly-like substance that we have seen, which is called frog spawn. Also, the teacher has given some more interesting information about the frogs. She has said, you could tell the weather by frogs too, for they were yellow in the sun and brown in rain. So she has said that frogs are a very important creature in nature. By observing a frog, you can understand what kind of weather you are going to have. If the frogs have a yellow skin, you will understand that it is going to be a sunny day, and suddenly if the skin starts turning brown, you will realize it's going to rain. So that is how in ancient times farmers used to understand that rain is going to come, and that is very, very scientific. It has a scientific explanation that these animals change, these insects and animals have tendency to change their skin color according to the weather, according to the situation. So this was the information provided by the teacher in the school. The boy was so impressed by the information, the boy was so excited by the information that he kept on collecting that jelly-like frog spawn, and kept it in the school or kept it in the house to observe how the frog spawn bursted into new life. It changed into tadpole, and from the tadpole it gradually changed into a frog. So this is the first stanza, and in the first stanza it is clear that the poet is sharing an experience about his childhood. The entire stanza is written in past tense, so everything that has happened in the past. Right now the things are different, and those different things can be understood in the next stanza, the second stanza. So there is a change of tone, there is a change of idea in the second stanza. The poet says, "Then one hot day when fields were rank with cow dung in the grass." Then one day came. Now when this one day came, a few weeks later, a few months later? No, a few years later. One day came when it was a hot day, a warm day, most probably in the season of summer, when the fields were filled with cow dung and they were smelling very badly. Rank means smell. Rank is generally a foul smell. So one day the agricultural fields and the ponds were smelling with cow dung. Why? Because the farmers must have given fertilizers, natural manures, and it was smelling. The natural manure smelled all around, making the whole situation rank, mane having a dirty smell. With cow dung in the grass, the angry frogs invaded the flax dam. On such a situation, on such a day, a few years later, a group of angry frogs attacked the flax dam. Now, invaded is a very serious term. It means to attack, like a foreign invader attacks a country with the intention of looting the country, plundering the country, or killing the people or the king of the country. So that is invaded. So suddenly, why the frogs became so angry? Till now they were so sweet, so gentle. If you remember, they were called the best part compared to the dragonflies, the butterflies, the blue bottles. They were the best part. So what happened that made the frogs so angry that they attacked, they invaded the flax dam? We will find out as we go ahead. I ducked through the hedges. Our poet, now a few years have passed, he is no longer that little child. He has grown up. He gradually moved through the bushes, beside the bushes which were located beside the flax dam. He walked through them to a coarse croaking. Coarse croaking, you can see C sound is repeated, and this is alliteration. So he noticed that there was a croaking of the frogs and a rough croaking. The frogs who invaded the flax dam made a rough sound, and the sound was so rough that the poet says that I had not heard before. He had been to this place so many times, but he had never heard the frogs so angry before this. He had never heard the frogs make such a rough sound before. The air was thick with a bass chorus. Bass chorus, bass actually means a low, loud sound. The opposite of bass would be shrill, a very high-pitched sound. Compared to that, bass is the low-pitched but loud sound. So the air was thick. How can air get thick? Air is something that is not tangible. You can't touch the air and understand whether it is thin or thick. It is not a piece of cloth, or it is not anything that you can touch. Basically, the poet is trying to say that the whole air was so much filled with the sound that the sound made the air heavy. See, this has a direct connection in the previous stanza. In the previous stanza, the poet had said about the gauze. The air was covered with the gauze of the blue bottles. Air was wrapped up with the gauze. Mane, the sound had surrounded the air. Same way, here also the air was not surrounded but filled with a thick, loud sound. Chorus means group sound. When you sing a song in a group, it is called a chorus. So all the frogs are croaking together, so it is a chorus. So all the frogs are croaking angrily in a such rough voice that the whole air is feeling as if it is heavy with the sound of the frogs. Right down the dam, gross-bellied frogs were croaked on sods. Sods, I told you, it means the tuft. So, as usual, the farmers have kept the flax plant to rot. On the top of the flax plant, they have kept some sods or grasses, tufts of grasses, so that it helps as a catalyst in the process of rotting. The frogs came and sat at the top of the tufts or the sods, and then they started making that loud croaking sound. But these frogs are not looking so gentle, so nice. They are gross-bellied frogs. They are looking ugly. Their body, their belly is looking ugly. So the ugly looking frogs had covered the sods of the dam. Their loose necks pulsed like sails. If you have seen a frog when it croaks, it has a thick neck, and suddenly the portion of the neck starts getting inflated like a balloon. When it starts making a sound, it gently raises the head and the neck portion of the frog gets inflated like a balloon. So the poet is making a comparison. He says that the neck of the frogs, when it was croaking, was looking like a sail of a ship. Sails are basically that white piece of cloth which is tied to the mast of a ship, which helps the ship to move forward. The air puts pressure on the sail and the sail helps the ship to move forward. So when the air puts pressure on the sail becomes curved, bent, and it starts floating. Same way, the neck of the frogs, like the sails of the ships, started floating, sometimes going up, sometimes going down. So this is a metaphor. Their loose necks, this is a simile because like is there, not a metaphor. This is a simile. Their loose necks pulsed like sails. So the necks of the frogs were vibrating. Pulsed here means vibrating like the sails of a ship. Some hopped. Not all frogs were standing still and croaking. Some of them were jumping also. The slap and plop were obscene threat. As the frogs were jumping, they were making slaps and plops, the sound that was made by the jumping of the frogs on the mud. You can understand that continuously if you jump on the mud, a slapping sound will be produced. So, according to the poet, the sound which was produced by the frog by jumping on the mud was like a threat, a dangerous threat. The frogs, so first of all, we saw that the frogs are angry. Secondly, we saw that they invaded, attacked. And thirdly, we see that the frogs are giving dangerous threats. What is so serious? What has happened that the frogs have become so angry? Let's read and find out. Some sat poised like mud grenades. But not all the frogs were jumping. Some frogs were sitting. Poised means properly positioned. They were sitting in a proper position looking like grenades. Grenades are small bombs. You must have seen hand grenades in films. They show it many times. You just have a key, need to tear it open and throw it and the grenade bursts. So the frogs were looking like grenades made of mud. Anytime they can explode. So another scary image with the frog. So the poet clearly is afraid of the frogs. That is why he is using such terms to describe the frogs. which are so scary. They are blunt heads farting. So the heads of the frogs are producing such an obscene sound that it is almost equivalent to farting. And this farting idea gets mixed with the foul smell that is coming out from the bog. A foul smell along with a foul sound is creating the idea of farting, as the frogs are continuously standing, some are jumping, some are croaking in that area. I sickened, turned and ran. The poet was so sick and tired of this situation. He felt so nauseating that he felt like running away from the place. He was irritated, he was frustrated by this whole scene. It was so nauseating that he simply turned and ran away from the place. The great slime kings were gathered there for vengeance. Great slime kings refer to the frog because they are the kings of the bog. They are the kings of mud. You will generally see the frogs are dominating the places where there is a mud or where there is dirty water. So they are the kings of mud and dirty water. That is why the poet calls them slime kings. So the frogs are slime kings, the rulers of the dirty waters, and they had gathered there for the purpose of vengeance. Vengeance means revenge. And I knew that if I dipped my hand, the spawn would clutch it. Now we realize why the poet is so afraid of the frogs and why the frogs are so angry. The poet in his boyhood days had repeatedly stolen the eggs of the frogs for his own scientific interest, for his own natural interest. He had stolen those babies of the frog, their future generation, and that is why the frogs are so angry. And today the poet knows very well that if he puts his hand inside the water or inside the flax pond, the frog spawn will catch him and not let him go. They will hold him and punish him. So he is now afraid of the frogs because now he realizes that he had once hurt the frogs by stealing their babies, by stealing their eggs. Now, coming back to the title of the poem, Death of a Naturalist, I told you that naturalist means a person who is a student or an expert of nature or natural history, a person who is interested to study nature or natural history. So you can understand by reading the first stanza that in his boyhood days, the poet was very much interested in nature and natural history. The poet was very much interested, especially after the teacher told him about the process of reproduction among the frogs. And he was so excited that he collected those frog eggs and kept them in his house and saw how they burst into new life. So he was indeed a naturalist. He was growing up like a naturalist. But you know that as we grow up, our intentions, our thoughts, our way of thinking keeps on changing. The things that we like in our childhood, it's not necessary that we will like the same thing in our adulthood. So the poet, when he grew up, when he became an adult, started disliking the natural world. He was no longer interested on the frogs. He considered the frogs dirty. He considers the flax pond, once upon a time the place which was his favorite place. He used to go there regularly. The same place after growing up became a dirty place which he tried to avoid. Smelly, dirty place. So with his adulthood, his attitude towards nature changed. And that change had killed the naturalist within him. He is no longer a naturalist. He is so much engrossed in human civilization that he is no longer bothered about the world of the nature. And that is why he even hates to dip his hand once again into that flax pond. Because if he puts his hand inside the flax pond, he knows that his hand will be covered with that jelly, his hand will be covered with dirt and mud, and he doesn't want his hand to be covered with dirt and mud. That is why he avoids it, he avoids the contact and just feels like running away, because the whole thought of the dirty pond fills his mind with disgust. So that is why, as a naturalist, he is no longer interested. The naturalist within him, which was there as a part of his mind in his childhood, has now died. So the poet calls the poem Death of a Naturalist.